In the shadow of ancient pines, where whispers of the past echo across still waters, stands a weathered lake house that no one dared to claim. For just $50, Elijah Harper, a man more comfortable with mountain trails than human conversation, purchased what locals called the Forgotten Place. With calloused hands and stubborn determination, he began restoring the crumbling walls, unaware of the secrets they contained. Each hammer blow seemed to awaken something long dormant. First came the hidden room behind the pantry, then the strange symbols carved into the basement pillars. But it was the leather-bound diary, tucked beneath loose floorboards, that truly began unraveling the mystery. What terrible truth had been buried beneath this house for all these years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rising sun filtered through pine branches as Elijah Harper stretched his aging frame. Another day in the wilderness. 58 years had weathered his face like the Appalachian Mountains themselves. Deep lines, rough edges, stories written in each crevice. His beard, more salt than pepper, had grown wild over the years, matching the untamed terrain he called home. The cabin's interior was Spartan. A wood stove, a hand-carved chair, shelves of preserved food, and tucked in the corner, gathering dust beneath a faded tarp, lay the cameras he hadn't touched in 7 years. Elijah's morning ritual never varied. Check the snares, collect water, scan the perimeter for signs of intruders, human or animal. The locals in Pine Hollow knew to give his territory a wide berth. Some called him a hermit, others a madman. Few remembered he had once been Elijah Harper, whose wildlife photographs had graced the pages of National Geographic. "You're running low," he muttered to himself, eyeing his dwindling coffee supply. A trip to town was necessary, though unwelcome. He fingered the battered telephoto lens in his pocket, his talisman. The crack running through the glass had rendered it useless as a tool, but it remained his one concession to sentimentality. Through that lens, he'd once captured a world's worth of beauty. Through that lens, he'd also watched as his wife's kayak disappeared beneath rapids he'd insisted they could navigate. 2 hours later, Elijah's rusted pickup rolled into Pine Hollow. Population 362. The general store stood as it had for decades, faded red paint, creaking porch bell that announced each visitor. "Well, look what the mountain spit out," Mabel Dixon remarked from behind the counter. 70-something with steel-gray hair, she'd run the place since before Elijah was born. Coffee, salt, matches. His words came out rough from disuse. "Would it kill you to say please?" Mabel raised an eyebrow. Elijah placed exact change on the counter without responding. As Mabel gathered his supplies, the bell jingled. In walked Sheriff Dan Palmer and Hank Winters from the county clerk's office, deep in conversation. "Just need someone to take it off our hands." "Tax burden at this point," Hank was saying. "Nobody's touching that place," the sheriff replied. "Not after everything that happened." "What place?" Mabel interjected, nosy as ever. "Old Caldwell House by Stillwater Lake," Hank replied. "County's listing it for practically nothing. $50. $50 for lakefront property?" Mabel whistled low. $50 for a death trap, Sheriff Palmer corrected. "Place should have been bulldozed years ago." Elijah found himself listening despite his determination to remain disconnected from town gossip. "It's been, 20 years since anyone lived there?" Mabel asked. 32, Sheriff Palmer said. "Not since the incidents," the word hung in the air. "Heavy with unspoken history. Postings on the board if anyone's fool enough to want it," Hank said. Pinning a paper to the community bulletin board, Elijah collected his supplies, intending to leave without engaging. But something drew his eyes to the posting. A grainy photograph showed a 2-story house with a wide porch overlooking a still lake. Despite obvious disrepair, something about it called to him. "I wouldn't if I were you," Mabel's voice startled him. She'd noticed his interest. "Didn't ask for your opinion," Elijah replied. "Folks disappeared from that house," she continued anyway. "Children first, then adults who went looking. Sounds like town superstition." "Believe what you want," Sheriff Palmer cut in. But I was deputy when we dragged the lake the third time. Never found bodies, just things that didn't make sense. What things? Elijah asked despite himself. Doesn't matter, the sheriff replied. House is cursed, lake's cursed. Smart people stay away. Back in his truck, Elijah found the property listing in his hand, uncertain when he'd taken it. His cabin was becoming harder to maintain as winter approached. Game was scarce. His savings, what remained of them, wouldn't last another year. $50 for a house. Cursed or not, it was shelter with access to fish. He studied the photograph. Something about the house seemed to stare back at him. The logical part of his brain suggested structural assessment, renovation costs, practical concerns. But deeper down, in a place he rarely acknowledged, something else stirred. The part of him that had died with Catherine 7 years ago flickered briefly with interest. That night, counting his remaining cash by lantern light, Elijah made his decision. $50 for a chance at something different. $50 to silence the whispers of his empty cabin. $50 to discover why the weathered house by the lake felt like it had been waiting for him all along. Pine Hollows County. Administrative building stood like a grey monument to bureaucracy, its stone facade worn by decades of mountain weather. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Elijah's boots echoed on the linoleum as he approached the clerk's desk, the property listing clutched in his calloused hand. Behind an ancient oak counter sat Martha Wilkins, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined paperwork with bird-like precision. She glanced up, recognition and something else. Was it concern? Flashing across her features. Mr. Harper, rare to see you in town 2 days running. Elijah placed the listing on the counter. I want to buy this. Martha's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the paper. The Stillwater property. It wasn't a question. Are you certain? It's just a house, Elijah said. No, Martha replied, her voice dropping. It isn't. She disappeared into a back room, returning with a thick folder that looked untouched for years. Dust plumed as she opened it. Property's been in county possession since 1992. Previous owner was Margaret Holloway. Before that, the Caldwell family. Before them, the Stevensons. She looked up. No one stays more than a year. Most leave sooner. People move, Elijah shrugged. Not like this, Martha said, sliding a form toward him. There's paperwork to sign. Unusual clauses. Elijah scanned the document. Standard transfer language until midway down. Buyer agrees to maintain all existing structures on the property in their original form. No demolition or significant alteration permitted to the main house, boat shed, or underground facilities. Underground facilities? Martha's eyes wouldn't meet his. Just legal language. County requirement. Another clause caught his attention. Buyer acknowledges awareness of historical incidents at the property and assumes all liability for personal safety. What incidents? Just sign if you're buying, Martha replied, her earlier hesitation transforming to impatience. Or don't. Makes no difference to me. Something felt wrong about her sudden shift, but Elijah had committed. He signed and counted out $50 in worn bills. Martha processed the payment with mechanical efficiency before withdrawing a small envelope from the folder. She slid it across the counter with evident reluctance. Property keys. Main door, back entrance, shed. She hesitated. The brass one? We don't know what it opens. Comes with the house. Elijah emptied the envelope. 3 ordinary keys, and one that was anything but. An ornate brass piece with strange markings along its shaft and an unusually shaped head. Previous owners left this? It's always been with the house papers. Martha's tone suggested further questions were unwelcome. Property's yours now. I've marked directions on the back of the deed. Outside, Elijah examined the brass key in sunlight. The symbols resembled nothing he recognized. Not letters or numbers, but intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. He pocketed it alongside his telephoto lens talisman. The drive to Stillwater Lake took him deep into a section of forest he'd rarely explored. The road deteriorated from asphalt to gravel to rutted dirt, branches scraping his truck's sides. Just as he considered turning back, the trees opened to reveal a panoramic view that stole his breath. Stillwater Lake stretched before him, a perfect mirror reflecting the surrounding mountains. Undisturbed by boats or human presence, its surface held an unnatural stillness that seemed almost deliberate. At the lake's edge stood his new home. The photograph hadn't captured its true character. 2 stories of weathered clapboard, a wraparound porch listing slightly toward the water, shuttered windows like closed eyes. Despite obvious neglect, the house possessed a certain dignity, a structure built to stand against time and elements. As Elijah parked, an unexpected sensation washed over him. He'd purchased the property for practical reasons: shelter, location, price. But standing before it now, another feeling emerged. Familiarity. As though he'd come home after a long absence, he approached slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The front steps creaked beneath his weight. At the door, he tried the main key, hearing the lock's mechanism reluctantly yield after years of disuse. The door swung open on protesting hinges, revealing shadows within. For a moment Elijah hesitated, Martha's strange behavior and the sheriff's warnings echoing in his mind. Then practicality reasserted itself. $50 for lakefront property. Whatever stories clung to this place were just that, stories. He stepped across the threshold into cool, still air that smelled of dust and something else, something older and less definable. Behind him, without touch or breeze, the door swung quietly closed. Morning light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. Elijah had spent the night in his truck, unwilling to sleep in the house before a proper inspection. Now, pad in hand, he methodically catalogued the structure's ailments: broken windows, rotting porch boards, leaking roof, water damage to the eastern wall. The list grew, yet something puzzled him. The damage seemed almost deliberate in its inconsistency. Some sections remained in surprisingly good condition despite decades of abandonment. Strange priorities, he muttered, testing a porch support that should have collapsed years ago but stood firm. After completing his assessment, Elijah drove to town for supplies. The hardware store occupied the corner of Pine Hollow's main street, its windows displaying tools and seasonal items. A bell jangled as he entered. Conversation stopped. 3 customers and the man behind the counter turned to stare. "Morning," Elijah nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. The shopkeeper, a man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, recovered first. "Morning. What can I help you with?" "Need renovation supplies." Elijah handed over his list. The shopkeeper scanned it, recognition dawning. "You're working on the Stillwater property." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns. "That's right." The other customers muttered excuses and departed. The bell announcing their hasty exit. "I'm Roy Caldwell," the shopkeeper said, extending his hand. "My family used to own that house." Elijah shook the offered hand. "Elijah Harper, what's your plan for the place?" "Fix it up." "Live there," Roy nodded thoughtfully. "Good location for fishing. Lake's got the biggest trout in the county." He began gathering items from Elijah's list. "Word of advice: focus on the roof and exterior walls first. Weather turns fast this time of year." "Already the plan." Roy hesitated before adding, "and maybe leave the basement for last." "Or never." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Problem with the basement?" "Just old wiring, probably." Roy's casual tone felt forced. "I can have these delivered if your truck's too small." Elijah declined the offer, paid for his supplies, and returned to the lake house. The rest of the day passed in physical labor, removing rotted boards from the porch, measuring for replacements. The work felt good, purposeful. By late afternoon, he'd made visible progress. Reaching beneath the porch for a dropped nail, his hand touched something solid. He extracted an antique carpenter's level, its brass components gleaming despite years of exposure. The wood showed minimal decay, as if preserved by some unknown means. Along the side, expertly etched lettering read, "Thomas Caldwell, Guardian." Caldwell, like the hardware store owner. Elijah turned the tool in his hands, appreciating its quality. As he rotated it, something shifted inside with a distinct click. The end cap loosened. Curious, he twisted it off to find a tightly rolled paper inside the hollow handle. The paper was brittle but intact. Carefully unrolling it revealed a handwritten note in faded ink. To the next guardian of Stillwater, the house stands watch. What sleeps beneath must remain asleep. Maintain the seals. Honor the boundaries. When the water speaks, do not answer. TC 1923. Elijah reread the cryptic message. Unease settling over him. Guardian. The same word from the property contract's strange clauses. A sound interrupted his contemplation, metal scraping against wood from inside the house. His tools shifting position. He'd secured the door before working outside. No windows were open. No wind strong enough to move heavy tools disturbed the late afternoon air. Yet when Elijah entered, he found his carefully organized tools rearranged on the kitchen floor, forming a rough circle. In the center lay the brass key from the county office. He stood motionless, listening to the house's silence, feeling suddenly as though the structure itself was watching him, evaluating him. Just the wind, he told himself, knowing it was a lie. As dusk approached, Elijah made a decision. He'd sleep in the house tonight, confront whatever was happening directly. He arranged his sleeping bag in what once was a living room, positioning himself to see both the front door and the kitchen doorway. The brass key he placed in his pocket, the carpenter's level, and its strange note beside his makeshift bed. As darkness fell, the lake's surface caught the last light, shimmering like black glass. From his window, Elijah watched it, remembering Roy's parting words as he'd left the hardware store. The lake gives before it takes. Mr. Harper, remember that. Elijah woke to sunlight streaming through dusty windows. Despite his vigilance, he'd slept deeply, more soundly than he had in years. The house creaked and settled around him, its sounds almost conversational. A week into renovations, he'd established a routine. Mornings for structural repairs, afternoons for interior work. The property was revealing itself gradually, like a slow confession. Today, he focused on the kitchen pantry. Its dimensions had bothered him since his first inspection, too shallow compared to the exterior wall. Measuring confirmed his suspicion, a 3-foot discrepancy between the pantry's interior depth and the house's exterior. Hidden space, he muttered, tapping the pantry's back wall. The hollow sound confirmed his theory. After clearing shelves of ancient preserves, Elijah examined the wall closely. No visible seams indicated a door. He ran fingers along the edges, finding nothing until his hand passed over a small knothole in the wood. Something clicked inside the wall. A section shifted slightly, pushing against the panel, revealed hinges on one side. The false wall swung open, releasing stale air from a narrow room concealed behind. Elijah retrieved his flashlight. The hidden chamber measured roughly 3 feet by 8 feet, a passage rather than a room. Wallpaper, once white but now yellowed, covered the walls. A small table stood against one wall, its surface bare, except for dust and what appeared to be candle wax. But it was the far wall that captured Elijah's attention. Pinned there hung a large piece of parchment, a map of the lake and surrounding land. Portions were charred, as though someone had attempted to burn it but stopped. Red markings indicated tunnels or passages beneath the lake, converging at its center. Notes in faded ink marked certain points with symbols matching those on the brass key. Beside the map hung an ornate compass in a wooden mounting bracket. Unlike standard compasses, this one featured unusual markings around its edge, the same symbols from the key and map. When Elijah removed it from the bracket, the needle spun wildly before settling in a direction he knew wasn't north. It pointed toward the lake. A sudden drop in temperature raised goosebumps on his arms. The air in the hidden room felt charged, as if disturbing its contents had awakened something. Elijah pocketed the compass and carefully removed the map from the wall. Back in the kitchen, he spread the map on the counter. Modern landmarks matched those on the parchment, confirming it represented this area. But the underground passages weren't on any survey he'd seen. Most troubling were the notations along the tunnel routes. Breach point 1893, containment failure 1923, reinforcement 1954. The compass, now on the counter beside the map, continued pointing toward the lake, regardless of orientation. Testing a theory, Elijah carried it to different windows. From each vantage point, the needle adjusted, always aiming toward what he estimated was the lake's center. He needed more information. The county library might have historical records explaining the tunnels. Collecting the map and compass, he headed to town. Pine Hollow Library occupied a Victorian house converted for public use. At the desk sat an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a nameplate reading, "Henrietta Morris, Librarian." "Historical maps of Stillwater Lake," Elijah requested. Henrietta's expression tightened. "Research project?" "Property owner," he replied. "The lake house." Her tone flattened. "Records on Stillwater are in the local history section. Limited access. I need to see them." She studied him, seeming to reach a decision. "Follow me." The local history room was locked. Inside, Henrietta indicated a specific shelf. "County surveys, geographical studies, newspaper archives." "I'll be outside." Elijah began with geological surveys. The earliest, from 1871, showed no lake, just forested valley. The 1872 survey marked a ground collapse event, creating a water-filled depression. Later surveys documented the lake's expansion over decades. Newspaper microfilms revealed more. An 1872 headline, "Terror in the night, ground opens, strange lights reported." Witnesses described voices from below and water that rose against gravity. Several residents abandoned homesteads after, reporting visitations by waterlogged figures. Most concerning were articles from 1923, the date on Thomas Caldwell's note. "Child missing near Stillwater," followed weeks later by "Search abandoned for Caldwell boy." The missing child was Michael Caldwell, age 8, the reports mentioned. His twin brother Robert surviving. Robert, Roy, the hardware store owner, wasn't just connected to the house, he'd experienced its horror firsthand. A final article from 1958 caught Elijah's eye. "Local woman missing, feared drowned, Margaret Holloway, the last owner before county possession." The report noted her interest in documenting Stillwater phenomena and unusual writings found in her home. When Elijah emerged from the history room, Henrietta waited expectantly. "Find what you needed?" she asked. "Some," he admitted. "The lake wasn't always there." "Things change," she replied cryptically. "Sometimes they break through. Break through from where?" Henrietta glanced at the compass, partially visible in his pocket. "You're carrying one of their tools," she said quietly. "They've already noticed you." Before he could question her further, she turned away. "Library's closing now." Outside, the compass needle spun frantically before settling again toward the lake. Toward whatever waited beneath, evening shadows lengthened across Pine Hollow's main street as Elijah parked outside the town's only diner. The Crossroads Cafe stood as it had for generations, neon open sign buzzing in the window, the smell of coffee and pie drawing in locals as daylight faded. Inside, conversations paused briefly at his entrance before resuming with deliberate casualness. Elijah chose a corner booth, positioning himself to observe the room while appearing focused on the laminated menu. A waitress approached, young by Pine Hollow standards, perhaps 40, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. "You're the one who bought the lake house," she stated, pouring coffee without asking. "Word travels fast. Always has." She smiled. "I'm Susan Miller. My father knew the Caldwells well. Seems everyone has a connection to that house. Small town. Smaller when you count those still willing to speak about Stillwater." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "Special today is meatloaf. Best thing on the menu." Elijah nodded acceptance. As Susan walked away, he noticed an elderly man at the counter watching him intently. White-haired, weathered face, probably mid-80s, nursing a cup of coffee with arthritic hands. After delivering the order to the kitchen, Susan returned. "That's Walter Briggs at the counter. He's been staring because he wants to talk to you, but won't make the first move. Stubborn old coot? About the lake house? About his sister, Emily. Susan lowered her voice. She was the third child to disappear. 1954. Minutes later, Walter sat across from Elijah, bringing his coffee and decades of burden with him. Never thought anyone would buy that place again, Walter began without introduction. County tried selling it back in the 60s. Again in the 80s. Always reverted back after a few months. People left? One way or another. Walter's gaze drifted to memories. My sister was 8 when she vanished. Pretty little thing with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Loved that lake. Said she had friends there. Friends? That's how it starts. Walter's fingers trembled slightly. Children hear them first. Voices in the water calling their names. Promising things. Emily said they sounded like children too. Lonely children wanting to play. Elijah thought of the missing Caldwell boy. How many disappeared? 5 children between 1923 and 1958. 2 adults who went searching. Walter removed something from his pocket. A silver locket on a delicate chain. Found this by the shore where Emily was last seen. It wasn't hers. He opened the locket to reveal a sepia photograph of identical twin boys, about 7 years old, wearing Sunday clothes, serious expressions. A single strand of dark hair was pressed against the glass. The Caldwell twins, Walter explained. Michael and Robert. Michael vanished in 23, first one taken. You've kept this all these years. Walter closed the locket gently. Tried giving it to Roy, Robert, once. He wouldn't touch it. Said his brother wasn't dead, just changed. Whatever that means. Did anyone search the tunnels? Elijah asked, testing a theory. Walter's eyes narrowed. What tunnels? The map shows passages beneath the lake. There's no map. Walter's tone turned sharp. And if there is, burn it. Those aren't tunnels. They're pathways for them to come through. Who are they? Ask the Watchers. That's what they called themselves. Group that built the house to monitor the lake after the ground collapse. Walter leaned forward. House calls to certain people, Mr. Harper. People who've lost something precious. Makes them think they might get it back. Elijah thought of Catherine, gone 7 years now. I'm not looking to recover anything. We all are. Walter's eyes held a lifetime of grief. That's how it finds us. He placed the locket on the table. Take this. I've carried it too long. Maybe it belongs with the house now. I can't. Emily would have been 73 this year. Time I stopped waiting for her to come home. Walter stood with effort. Whatever's in that lake, it doesn't give back what it takes. It only uses the memories to bait the hook. After Walter left, Elijah examined the locket. The faces of the twin boys stared back, innocent and unaware of how their paths would diverge. He slipped it into his pocket alongside the compass, which had finally stopped its incessant pointing now that darkness had fallen. As he drove back toward the lake, the night sky clear and star-filled above him, Elijah considered Walter's warning. The house had called to him somehow, that much seemed true. But not with promises of recovering what was lost. Catherine was gone. No voice from any lake could change that, yet as Stillwater came into view, moonlight creating a silvered path across its surface. Elijah heard what sounded like distant laughter, children's laughter carried on the night breeze, from the water, calling his name. Elijah had avoided the basement for 2 weeks, focusing instead on the roof, windows, and exterior walls. But each night the house seemed to direct his attention downward. Pipes would clang beneath the floor, or the compass needle would spin wildly before pointing directly at the basement door. The entrance was in the kitchen, a heavy wooden door with iron hinges, secured by a padlock that matched the brass key. When Elijah finally inserted the key, it turned with surprising smoothness for a mechanism unused for decades. The door opened to reveal narrow wooden stairs disappearing into darkness. Flashlight in hand, Elijah descended carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. The beam illuminated swirling dust motes and cobwebs that parted like curtains. At the bottom, he swept the light across the space. The basement extended beneath the entire house, but what stopped Elijah cold was its construction. While the house above was wood and typical building materials, The basement walls were stone, massive blocks fitted together with precision, their surface smooth from age. "These aren't from the 1800s, he muttered, running his hand along the cool surface. The flashlight beam caught something embedded in the nearest wall, symbols carved into the stone. Not graffiti, but deliberate, precise work. The same symbols from the brass key, the map, and the compass. Elijah moved deeper into the basement. Central support pillars rose from floor to ceiling, not wooden posts as expected, but stone columns carved with intricate patterns. Each pillar featured different symbols, spiraling from floor to ceiling in what appeared to be a narrative sequence. In the center of the basement floor stood a raised circular platform of fitted stone. Within this circle, embedded in the floor, was a bronze pendant the size of his palm. Elijah knelt to examine it, surprised to find it warm to the touch despite the cellar's chill. The pendant featured concentric circles filled with the now familiar symbols. Something about their arrangement suggested rotation, as if the rings were meant to move like a combination lock. At the center was an inset, resembling the unusual head of the brass key. As Elijah lifted the pendant, his flashlight flickered and died, plunging the basement into absolute darkness. He froze, other senses heightening immediately. The air pressure changed, becoming heavier, pressing against his eardrums. The silence deepened to an unnatural degree, not just quiet, but the absence of sound. Then came the voice. "Have you brought the key?" The words weren't spoken aloud, but seemed to form directly in his mind, high and childlike, yet ancient like water running over stones for centuries. Elijah remained motionless, eyes straining against perfect darkness. "We've waited so long," the voice continued. "Are you the new guardian? Who are you?" Elijah's words fell dead in the thick air. "We are the beneath. The waiting ones." A pause. "Have you come to wake us fully?" Cold sweat formed on Elijah's brow. His hand tightened around the pendant, which grew warmer against his palm. "I don't understand," he managed. "The water remembers. The stone remembers." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You carry loss inside you like the others. A perfect hollow for us to fill." Something brushed against Elijah's leg, not solid, but not quite liquid either. He stepped back, bumping into one of the carved pillars. "Show yourself," he demanded. "We have no form here." "Not yet," the voice sounded closer. "But you could give us shape, like the Caldwell boy did." The mention of Michael Caldwell sent adrenaline coursing through Elijah. He backed toward where he remembered the stairs being, the pendant clutched tightly. "The last guardian tried to seal us away," the voice continued, now sounding like multiple overlapping whispers. "But doorways work in both directions once opened." Elijah's back hit the wooden staircase. He began ascending backward, unwilling to turn away from whatever presence filled the darkness. "You cannot leave," the voice hardened, layers of other voices joining in dissonant harmony. "Not with our key." The pendant in Elijah's hand burned suddenly, forcing him to drop it. It hit the stone floor with a resonant tone that seemed to build rather than fade. The basement door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. Elijah lunged up the remaining steps, grabbing the handle. Locked. Behind him, a soft glow emanated from the pendant on the floor, illuminating the basement in eerie blue-green light. The carved symbols on walls and pillars appeared to writhe subtly, as if alive. In the center of the stone circle, where the pendant had been, the floor began to ripple, solid stone moving like disturbed water. Elijah pounded on the basement door, panic rising. After 3 desperate blows, it suddenly gave way, swinging open. He scrambled through, slamming it behind him. Outside the kitchen window, Stillwater Lake shimmered unnaturally under the afternoon sun, its surface forming perfect concentric circles like those on the pendant, centering on the house. The hardware store's closed sign hung in the window, but lights glowed inside. Elijah rapped sharply on the glass door. Moments later, Roy Caldwell appeared, hesitated, then unlocked the door. "We need to talk," Elijah said without preamble. Roy studied him, noting the pallor and tension. "You found something in the basement." It wasn't a question. The voices from the lake. "Your brother heard them too." Roy's shoulders sagged slightly. He relocked the door and gestured toward the back. "Not here. Come to my house." 20 minutes later, they sat in Roy Caldwell's modest living room, coffee untouched between them. Family photos decorated the walls, Roy's life displayed chronologically from childhood through marriage, children, grandchildren. But in the early photos, another boy identical to Roy appeared. Then abruptly, around age 8, the twin vanished from the images. From a weathered wooden box, Roy withdrew a faded photograph, himself and Michael in matching outfits. "Standing by the lake. Last picture of us together," Roy explained. "Day before he disappeared, what happened to him?" Roy stared at the photograph. "Official story. Drowned, unofficially. The lake took him," he set down the picture. "But that's not entirely accurate either. Michael went willingly." "Tell me everything," Elijah said. "It started with voices, whispers Michael heard when we played by the water. I heard them too, but they were clearer to him. They told him secrets, showed him things." Roy unlocked a drawer and removed a small red journal with childish handwriting on the cover. "Michael Caldwell. His diary," Roy explained. "Found it under his bed after he vanished." Elijah carefully opened the journal. Pages filled with a child's handwriting and drawings, crude but detailed sketches of strange, elongated figures with large eyes, scenes of underwater structures, and careful records of conversations with what Michael called his water friends. "They're from very far away," one entry read. "They say they came through a doorway in the deep dark. They want to show me their home." Later entries grew more disturbing. The water friends say they need a doorkeeper to help them. They're trapped and want to go home, but they need someone special to open the way. The final entry sent a chill down Elijah's spine. "They say I'm perfect because I have a twin. 2 parts of one whole. They can use one part to anchor the door, while the other crosses over. Tomorrow night they'll show me how." Elijah looked up. He knew he was going somewhere. Roy nodded. "That's why I've never believed he drowned. He crossed over, wherever that means." He took back the journal. "After Michael vanished, my father became obsessed with the lake. Joined the Watchers group. They were already monitoring the lake, had built the house as an observation post decades earlier. What exactly were they watching for? Signs of activity. The lake pulses. There are cycles when whatever is down there becomes more active. Children disappear during active phases." Roy's voice grew tight. "After Michael, there were 3 more. Emily Briggs was the last child. Then Margaret Holloway, she was different. A researcher who came investigating the disappearances. She was the last adult taken. Walter Briggs said the house calls to people who've lost something." Roy studied Elijah. "What did you lose, Mr. Harper?" The question struck like a physical blow. "My wife. Kayaking accident." "I'm sorry." Roy's expression softened. "That's how it works. It finds people with voids inside them, perfect hollows, as my father called them, spaces where grief lives. It offers to fill those spaces with something else. What is it?" The Watchers had theories. Some believed it was an entity from another dimension. Others thought ancient beings hibernating underground. My father believed they were travelers, trapped between worlds, using human emotion as energy to maintain their existence. Roy returned to the wooden box, removing a folded paper. "This might help. My father's notes on the cycle. According to his calculations, we're entering another active phase." Elijah took the paper, examining the complex chart of dates, lunar phases, and lake water levels. All previous disappearances occurred during similar convergences, a pattern forming again now. "Why tell me this?" Elijah asked. "Because you're already involved." Roy's expression darkened. "The house chose you as it chose others. But you need to understand, whatever promises the voices make, whatever they show you, they lie. They showed Michael visions of wondrous places, but what they wanted was a conduit. For what? To come through fully." Roy looked suddenly older, burdened. "The Watchers believed the basement was built over something ancient, a doorway. The symbols are a lock, and the Guardian is meant to ensure it stays closed." He leaned forward. "But Michael had the key. And now, apparently, so do you. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the mountains, though the sky had been clear moments before. Both men glanced toward the window as rain began to fall, unnaturally heavy drops that hit the glass with deliberate rhythm, like fingers tapping to be let in. The storm intensified as Elijah returned to the lake house, rain hammering against his truck with unnatural force. Wind howled across the water, yet the lake's surface remained eerily undisturbed. No ripples, no waves, as if protected by an invisible barrier. Inside, water had seeped beneath doors and windows, forming perfect circles on the wooden floors. The house groaned under the storm's assault, timbers creaking in patterns that almost resembled speech. Elijah moved through rooms with growing unease, checking for damage. In the living room, he froze. The floorboards where he'd been pacing earlier had warped upward, revealing a previously hidden compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound book sealed with the same unusual wax he'd seen on other artifacts. The Journal of Margaret Holloway, the last adult to disappear. Breaking the seal, Elijah found pages filled with precise handwriting, detailed observations, sketches and theories compiled over 18 years. Margaret had come to Stillwater in 1940 as a young anthropologist investigating local legends. What began as academic research became obsession as she documented the lake's cycles and collected accounts of the disappearances. Her early entries showed scientific skepticism. Local superstitions attribute sentience to the lake, but geological explanations are more plausible. The unusual depth and underground connection to aquifer systems could create sound phenomena mistaken for voices. By 1945, her tone had shifted. The symmetrical arrangement of stone beneath the house predates known settlement patterns. Carbon dating suggests the basement construction occurred over 2,000 years ago, inconsistent with colonial or even pre-colonial Native American building techniques. The most disturbing entries began in 1952. I've heard them now. The voices. They speak simultaneously on multiple tonal levels, some audible, others felt rather than heard. They know things they shouldn't. Private memories, desires. They offered to return Thomas to me, my stillborn son. How could they know about him? Margaret had compiled a comprehensive history of the Watchers, tracing their origins to an 1873 coalition of locals who witnessed the lake's formation. Originally called the Lake Guardians, they constructed the house directly over what they termed a weak point, where the boundary between worlds had thinned. The Watchers' purpose was threefold, Margaret wrote. Observe the cycles, maintain the seals, and prevent contact during active phases. The original group included members with tribal knowledge from local nations who recognized the symbols as ancient warnings. Among the journal pages, Elijah found a carefully wrapped object, a clay tablet fragment, its edges smoothed by time. The tablet bore markings identical to the basement symbols, surrounding a depression that matched the shape of the brass key. Margaret's notes identified it as pre-Columbian, possibly traded from Central America. Similar artifacts found at other doorway sites worldwide, always associated with water that speaks and unexplained disappearances. Her final entries grew increasingly paranoid. They're growing stronger with each cycle. Each person taken provides more energy for them to maintain their presence here. The children were conduits, perfect vessels with developing minds, flexible enough to survive crossing. The symbols are both lock and key. I've identified the pattern now. With proper arrangement, the doorway can be permanently sealed, but it requires a willing sacrifice to complete the ritual. The last entry, dated the day of her disappearance, contained a single line. I understand now what must be done. May those who come after forgive what I could not complete. Elijah closed the journal, mind reeling. Margaret hadn't been taken. She'd gone willingly. Attempting a ritual she believed would seal the doorway permanently, a ritual she'd apparently failed to complete. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and the house lights flickered. In their momentary darkness, Elijah glimpsed movement, reflected in the window glass, not his own shadow, but something else. Something with too many angles, watching from the lake. When light returned, water had seeped under the front door, forming a perfect path from the entrance to where he stood. The compass in his pocket began spinning wildly, its motion so violent he could feel it through the fabric. From outside came a sound unlike any storm, a thrumming vibration that resonated through the house foundations, through the floor, through Elijah's bones. The basement door swung open of its own accord. Below, blue-green light pulsed in the rhythm of a heartbeat. Elijah placed Margaret's journal and the clay tablet on the table beside Michael's diary and Roy's cycle charts. Pieces of a puzzle spanning centuries, all converging now during his ownership. Not coincidence, but design. The house had chosen him. The question was why. From the basement stairs came a child's voice, not in his mind this time, but clear and audible. "We need a new guardian, Elijah. The last one failed us." In the journal's final pages, Margaret had drawn the ritual configuration with a warning beside it. Once begun, the guardian must choose, seal the door or open it fully. There is no middle path. Dawn broke over Stillwater Lake with unnatural clarity, the storm having passed as suddenly as it appeared. Elijah stood on the shore, watching the glassy surface for signs of disturbance. After a sleepless night studying Margaret's journal and the artifacts he'd collected, he needed to see the lake itself, to confront the source directly. The small rowboat from the property's shed had weathered decades surprisingly well. Another inconsistency in the house's selective decay. Elijah dragged it to the water's edge, the hull sliding into the lake with barely a ripple. He rowed toward the center, where the compass needle pointed with unwavering certainty. The oars moved through water with unusual resistance, as if passing through something denser than liquid. Beneath the boat, darkness stretched beyond what seemed physically possible, the lake bottom invisible despite the clear morning light. Halfway to the center, Elijah shipped the oars. Stillness enveloped him. No wind, no bird song, no insects buzzing. Just perfect silence and the subtle vibration of something massive stirring below. According to Margaret's notes, the lake's unusual depth defied geological explanation. Sonar surveys in the 1950s recorded inconsistent measurements, some suggesting depths greater than the surrounding mountain height should allow. The most disturbing finding, the bottom appeared to shift between readings. From his pack, Elijah removed a fishing line with weighted measuring tape. He lowered it into the water, watching the numbers disappear beneath the surface. 10 feet, 50, 100. At 300 feet, the line should have reached bottom, according to official surveys. It continued unspooling. At 500 feet, the line went slack. Elijah pulled, meeting no resistance. The end came up severed, the cut impossibly clean. Below the boat, the water darkened, not from cloud shadow or depth, but from something moving beneath, something vast and shapeless, its edges constantly reforming. The boat rocked gently as the surface around it began to change. The water grew thicker, more viscous, forming subtle patterns that resembled the symbols from the basement pillars. A small whirlpool formed beside the boat, no more than a foot across. From its center rose a perfectly spherical drop of water the size of a marble, defying gravity to hover above the surface. Then another, and another. Soon a dozen water spheres floated around the boat, catching sunlight like crystal. One sphere drifted toward Elijah, stopping at eye level. Within its transparent surface, an image formed, Catherine in their canoe, laughing, alive. The last moment of joy before the rapids claimed her. "We preserve what is lost," came the child's voice from the previous night, now emanating from the water itself. "We can return her to you." Elijah's hand trembled as he reached toward the sphere. Inside, Catherine turned as if sensing him, her eyes focusing directly on his. Her lips formed his name. "She's not gone," the voice continued, "just held between moments. Time moves differently in the deep places." "You're lying," Elijah whispered, though doubt crept into his certainty. The image was too perfect, too real. Details he'd forgotten about her face now restored with painful clarity. "See for yourself." The sphere elongated, forming a small vial of crystal-clear material that wasn't quite glass. It floated to Elijah's palm, cool against his skin. Inside, lake water swirled continuously, forming and reforming into miniature versions of Catherine's face, a token of truth, evidence that we can fulfill our promise. Around the boat, the other spheres transformed as well, each showing a different face. Michael Caldwell, Emily Briggs, the other missing children, Margaret Holloway, all alive within the water, all seemingly conscious and waiting. They're not dead, the voice explained. The door opened just enough to preserve them in between. But it cannot remain half open forever. The Guardian must decide. What happens if the door opens fully? Elijah asked, unable to look away from Catherine's face in the vial. We return home and take our preserved ones with us. And if it closes, the water darkened. Then all passages are severed. Those held in between would be lost forever. The implication hung in the air between them. If Elijah followed Margaret's ritual to seal the doorway, Catherine and all the others taken by the lake would be permanently lost. If he opened it fully, whatever that meant, they might be freed, but at what cost? Why me? Elijah demanded. Why was I chosen? The Guardian must understand loss, but not be consumed by it, the voice replied. You've carried your grief without surrendering to it. That balance is rare. The water around the boat began to churn, the peaceful surface transforming into concentric rings emanating outward. Below, the massive darkness rose closer to the surface. Tonight the alignment peaks, the voice said. You must decide. But first, see what we offer. The lake surface beneath the boat suddenly became transparent, revealing a shimmering city of impossible architecture stretching into abyssal depths. Structures of crystal and living material pulsed with internal light. Within them moved figures both familiar and utterly alien, the missing ones integrated into something beyond human understanding. And among them, looking up toward him with perfect recognition, Catherine. The County Historical Society occupied a Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Pine Hollow, its weathered sign promising local heritage preservation since 1902. Inside, glass cases displayed arrowheads, pioneer tools, and faded photographs of stern-faced founders. The building stood empty except for a grey-haired woman arranging a textile display. We're closed for inventory, she called without turning. I need information about Stillwater Lake. Elijah replied. The woman froze, then slowly faced him. You're Harper, the new owner. Her eyes narrowed. I'm Dr. Abigail Winters, retired geologist and current Historical Society director. The lake wasn't always there, Elijah stated. No. She gestured toward her office. Perhaps we should talk privately. Inside the cluttered office, maps covered the walls, geological surveys, topographical renderings, and hand-drawn charts tracking the lake's changing dimensions across decades. Abigail cleared papers from a chair, inviting Elijah to sit. I've studied Stillwater for 40 years, she began. Started as scientific curiosity, became something more personal. She opened a drawer, removing a stone object wrapped in cloth. Found this during a shoreline survey in 1987, buried where the original lakeshore would have been before expansion. She unwrapped a partial stone mask, its surface dark with age. Carved symbols matching those from the basement pillars encircled its edge. The eye sockets were oddly shaped, longer than human eyes should be. Predates European settlement, Abigail explained. Carbon dates to approximately 900 CE. Local Shoshone elders I consulted claim no knowledge of it. But one elder mentioned stories of the time before time, when sky visitors taught their ancestors rituals to keep the beneath waters sleeping. The ground collapse in 1872 created the lake, Elijah said, recalling the newspaper archives. That's the official record. Abigail's voice lowered. But regional myths describe periodic awakenings throughout history, times when the ground would open and water would rise, bringing strange phenomena. Each awakening ended when ritual specialists wearing masks like this one performed ceremonies to reseal the doorway. She turned the mask over, revealing more symbols inscribed inside, precise instructions for the wearer. I believe what happened in 1872 wasn't the creation of something new, but the re-emergence of something ancient, she continued. The geographical record shows periodic water features at that location going back thousands of years, each appearing suddenly and each eventually disappearing just as mysteriously. What about the tunnels beneath the lake? Abigail's eyes widened slightly. You've seen the maps and more. The compass, the tablet, Margaret Holloway's journal. Margaret was my predecessor here. Abigail sighed. Her research laid the groundwork for mine. She discovered what I later confirmed. Stillwater isn't an isolated phenomenon. She unrolled a world map marked with red dots. These locations all share the same pattern: sudden water feature formation, unusual depths defying geographical logic, disappearances, and local stories about voices or beings in the water. Elijah noted dozens of marks across every continent. Most dormant now, Abigail explained, but they follow cycles of activity, and our models suggest a global pattern. When one site activates, others follow. Stillwater is showing signs of entering an active phase now, but it's not the only one. She indicated recent newspaper clippings about unexplained phenomena at lakes in Oregon, Russia and Zimbabwe. The tunnels, Abigail continued, aren't physical passages but what Margaret called thin spaces, places where the boundary between our world and somewhere else becomes permeable during active phases. What's on the other side? Elijah asked. We don't know definitively, but every culture with these sites describes beings that exist in a state between matter and energy, capable of assuming forms that human minds can comprehend. She hesitated. Beings that preserve human consciousness somehow, particularly those lost to water. The crystal vial pulsed in Elijah's pocket, as if responding to her words. They showed me Catherine, he admitted. My wife, 7 years gone. They say she's preserved, not dead. Compassion and alarm crossed Abigail's face. That's their method. They find what we've lost and offer its return. She touched the mask. Every culture with these sites developed containment rituals. The basement of your house was built as a containment chamber, the last line of defense when the cycle peaks. Margaret tried to seal it permanently, and failed. Abigail's voice tightened. The pattern repeats. A guardian is chosen, offered the return of something precious, and faced with an impossible choice. What happens if the doorway opens fully? Elijah asked. Abigail met his gaze steadily. No historical record exists of that outcome. Every previous cycle ended with successful containment, or the record simply stops. And those taken by the lake remain in between. Her eyes softened. I understand the temptation, Elijah. Better than you might think. She opened a desk drawer, removing a photograph of a young woman beside a lake in Oregon. My daughter Sarah, 28 years ago. She heard voices from the water too. The mask on the desk seemed to watch them with its empty eye sockets. Ancient and patient, waiting for the cycle to complete once more. I need to see the house, Abigail said quietly. If the cycle is peaking, we have very little time. Twilight descended as Elijah's truck pulled up to the lake house, Abigail's sedan following close behind. The lake's surface glowed with subtle bioluminescence, a phenomenon Abigail noted wasn't recorded in any scientific literature about the region. It's further along than I thought, she murmured, removing equipment from her trunk. The cycle is accelerating. Inside, Abigail moved with the precision of someone who had prepared for this moment for decades. She examined each artifact Elijah had collected, making rapid notes in a leather journal similar to Margaret Holloway's. Margaret was right about the convergence points, she said, studying the maps. The basement is positioned directly above a nexus in the tunnel system. She unpacked scientific instruments, sensors, meters, cameras modified with special filters. The centerpiece was a device resembling a radio with multiple antennae and a digital display. Electromagnetic frequency reader, she explained. Designed to detect energy signatures outside normal parameters. When activated, the device emitted a soft hum, The display showed a baseline reading that spiked dramatically as Abigail moved toward the basement door. "The containment chamber is active," she confirmed. Energy building toward critical threshold. They descended the basement stairs together. The stone pillars gleamed in the beam of their flashlights, the carved symbols seeming to shift subtly when viewed from the corner of the eye. Abigail placed sensors around the room, each connected to her equipment. The EMF reader's display fluctuated wildly, eventually stabilizing into patterns that matched the symbols on the walls. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "The energy itself is encoded with information, a language of sorts." She photographed the pillars with her specialized camera. When reviewed, the images revealed layers invisible to the naked eye, additional symbols that only appeared when viewed through certain light frequencies. "The containment system is more sophisticated than I imagined," Abigail said, excitement overriding caution. "These aren't just symbols. They're a complex binding mechanism, a multi-dimensional lock for the doorway," Elijah supplied. "Yes, but more elegant than I'd theorized." Her eyes gleamed with scientific fervor. "The Watchers didn't just build a physical barrier. They created an energy matrix that contains whatever is trying to come through." The EMF reader suddenly spiked, its display scrambling into static before resolving into a perfect circle with radiating lines, an image resembling a portal or doorway. "It's responding to our presence," Abigail said. Becoming aware of observation, the basement temperature dropped sharply. Their breath clouded in the sudden cold as the reader's display changed again, now showing wave-like patterns that pulsed in rhythm like heartbeats. "Multiple signatures," Abigail noted clinically, though her hand trembled slightly. "Not just one entity, many." A soft voice emerged from the darkness beyond their flashlight beams, the same childlike tone Elijah had heard before, but now with undertones of something ancient and vast. "The observer returns," it said. "She who watches but never acts." Abigail froze, the color draining from her face. "You know me," she whispered. "We know all who study the doorways." The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You have sought us across many convergence points. Oregon, Manitoba, Kyoto." Elijah glanced at Abigail, whose scientific detachment had cracked, revealing raw emotion beneath. "Where is she?" Abigail demanded. "Where is my daughter?" "Sarah swims in the deep currents now," the voice replied. "She has joined with what waits below. Would you like to speak with her?" The EMF reader's display changed again, forming the outline of a young woman's face. From its speaker came a new voice, human, female, achingly young. "Mom? Mom, is that you?" Abigail's composure shattered. She grabbed the device with shaking hands. "Sarah, baby, where are you?" "It's beautiful here, Mom." The voice contained wonder and something else, a harmonic quality that wasn't quite human. "Everything you theorized was right, but so much more. The beings here don't die. They transform. They've shown me things no human has ever seen." "I'll find you," Abigail promised, tears streaming down her face. "I'll bring you home." "I am home," Sarah's voice replied. "But you could join me. When the doorway fully opens, you could cross over." Elijah watched understanding dawn on Abigail's face. This wasn't just about scientific discovery for her. It had always been about finding her daughter. "The ritual," Elijah said quietly. "You don't want to contain it. You want to open it completely." Abigail met his gaze, years of hidden purpose revealed. "Wouldn't you? If it meant getting Catherine back." The crystal vial in Elijah's pocket pulsed with blue light, Catherine's face forming and reforming in the swirling water. "You have both lost," the original voice returned. "Both preserved in memory what was taken by water. We offer reunion, but only when the doorway opens fully." "How?" Abigail asked, her scientific restraint abandoned. "Tell me how to open it." "The Guardian holds the key," the voice replied. "The ritual works in both directions. What seals can also open, if the intention is aligned." From the shadows, blue-green light began to pulse, revealing the bronze pendant Elijah had left behind, now floating in the air at the center of the stone circle. Tonight the convergence peaks, the voice continued. The Guardian must decide, seal our passage forever, or open the way for all to cross. Abigail turned to Elijah, her expression transformed by desperate hope. We could have them back, she whispered. Both of them, all of them. The EMF reader spiked again, its display now showing energy readings beyond its measurement capacity. In the corner, one of Abigail's sensors began to melt, overwhelmed by forces it wasn't designed to detect. It's happening already, she said. The doorway is beginning to open on its own. We just need to help it along. A knock at the door interrupted Elijah and Abigail's basement exploration. Outside stood Roy Caldwell, Martha Wilkins, and Henrietta Morris, their faces grave in the porch light. We felt it starting, Roy said without preamble. The whole town can sense it. Inside, the trio surveyed Abigail's equipment with growing concern. You're measuring it, Martha accused. Not containing it. I'm documenting a scientific phenomenon, Abigail replied defensively. You're interfering with forces beyond your understanding, Henrietta countered, her librarian's reserve giving way to urgency. We've maintained the balance for generations. Balance? Abigail scoffed. You've kept people ignorant while perpetuating a cycle of disappearances. We've preserved the boundary, Martha insisted. Contained what lies beyond. At what cost? Abigail's voice sharpened. My daughter, Roy's brother, all those children. Roy stepped between them. This isn't helping, he turned to Elijah. You've heard them now. Seen what they offer? Elijah nodded, the crystal vial heavy in his pocket. Then you know why we can't let the doorway open fully, Roy continued. What they show is only what they want us to see. From the back of his truck, Roy retrieved a large wooden crate. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, was an antique phonograph, an Edison cylinder model from the early 1900s, its brass horn and wooden cabinet meticulously restored. Thomas Caldwell's, my grandfather's, Roy explained. Part of the watcher's equipment. He carried it carefully to the living room, setting it on a table. The others followed, watching as he wound the mechanism and lowered the needle onto the spinning cylinder, but there was no cylinder installed. This was designed to record, Roy explained. But my grandfather discovered it could capture other sounds, voices that normal human ears couldn't detect. The empty phonograph began to emit static. Then voices, dozens overlapping, some childlike, others older, all speaking with the same strange harmonic quality Elijah had. Heard in Sarah's voice through the EMF reader, we are the between ones. The doorway must open. We have waited so long. Join us in transformation. Then, cutting through the cacophony, distinct voices. Michael Caldwell. Preserved. Emily Briggs, preserved. Margaret Holloway, preserved. Sarah Winters, preserved. Catherine Harper. Newly gathered, Elijah stiffened at his wife's name. Abigail's hand flew to her mouth at her daughters. They're cataloguing their collection, Martha said quietly. Like specimens, Roy stopped the phonograph. My grandfather recorded this in 1952, during the last major convergence. The names change, but the pattern remains the same. They collect, they preserve, they wait. For what? Elijah asked. Critical mass, Henrietta answered. Enough human consciousness to maintain a foothold in our reality. That's speculation, Abigail objected. You have no evidence? We have this, Martha interrupted, producing a folded paper from her purse, yellowed with age, covered in meticulous handwriting. Margaret Holloway's final observations, not included in her journal. She left it with me before attempting her ritual. The paper detailed Margaret's conclusion that the entities weren't offering salvation, but transformation, absorption into a collective. Consciousness that used human emotion and memory as energy. They feed on grief, Martha explained. Our longing for the lost creates a perfect conduit. They offer reunion, but what they deliver is assimilation. Roy restarted the phonograph. This time a single voice emerged, a child's, but with unsettling maturity beneath its tone. The time approaches. The Guardian must choose, open the way fully or seal it forever. There is no middle path. That's Michael, Roy whispered, pain etching his features. My brother, but changed. Henrietta turned to Elijah. The house chose you as guardian for a reason. You understand loss, but haven't surrendered to it. That balance is what's needed for the containment ritual. But you could have them back, Abigail interjected desperately. All of them, Catherine, Michael, Sarah. Not as they were, Martha countered. As what they've become. Elijah's mind raced, torn between possibilities. The crystal vial pulsed in his pocket, Catherine's face forming and dissolving in endless cycles. Why tell me this now? He asked the 3 townspeople. Because we're the last of the Watchers, Roy explained. We've maintained the vigil, waiting for each new guardian to emerge. But we've never faced a convergence this powerful. The phonograph needle jumped, the machine's horn amplifying a new sound, water rushing, rising, pressing against barriers both physical and metaphysical. It's starting, Henrietta whispered. Outside, Stillwater Lake had begun to glow, concentric circles of blue-green light expanding outward from its center. The house trembled as if in response, the basement door swinging open of its own accord. From below came the sound of stone, grinding against stone, as the floor of the containment chamber began to shift. The seal is breaking on its own, Martha said, fear evident in her voice. We're out of time. Abigail's equipment beeped urgently, readings spiking beyond measurable limits. Her expression wavered between scientific fascination and maternal yearning. Guardian, Michael's voice called from the phonograph. The doorway awaits your decision. Night fell completely as tension built within the lake house. Elijah felt pulled between opposing forces, Abigail's desperate hope to recover her daughter and the Watcher's warnings about the entity's true nature. All the while, Catherine's face formed and dissolved in the crystal vial, and calling to him without words. I need time to think, he announced, retreating to the porch, despite protests from both sides. Outside, the lake glowed with increasing intensity, its surface now completely still. A perfect mirror reflecting stars that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the light beneath. The air smelled of ozone and something else, an ancient organic scent like fertile soil from impossible depths. Elijah clutched the porch railing, mind racing. Was he truly chosen as guardian for his ability to balance grief with acceptance? Or had the entities selected him for manipulation, knowing his loss of Catherine had created the perfect vulnerability? The answer came unexpectedly. A soft splash drew his attention to the shore, where a small package wrapped in waterproof material had washed up. Inside, he found a flat, polished piece of obsidian, volcanic glass, worked into a perfect oval, its surface darker than the night around it. Upon lifting it, Elijah realized it wasn't reflecting his face or the stars above. Instead, its surface showed scenes from beneath the lake, vast crystalline structures, beings of light and water moving with fluid grace, and human figures suspended in various states of transformation. He recognized Michael Caldwell, now older than the child who disappeared, his features elongated and his eyes larger than human proportions should allow. Emily Briggs, similarly altered. Margaret Holloway, her researcher's gaze now containing ancient knowledge. Sarah Winters, half human and half something else, observing specimens in what appeared to be a laboratory of light. And Catherine, still fully human, recently arrived, watching the others with wary fascination. Unlike the crystal vial's idealized images or the phonograph's disembodied voices, the mirror showed unfiltered truth. These weren't prisoners begging release, but beings in transition, human consciousness gradually merging with something beyond earthly understanding. As he watched, Catherine turned as if sensing his observation. Her lips formed his name, not a plea for rescue, but a communication. They preserve what they don't understand. Her voice somehow reached him through the obsidian. Human emotion, connection, loss, things alien to their nature. Are you still you? Elijah whispered. Parts of me. Growing different, neither captured nor free, transforming. Her expression conveyed complex emotion beyond simple categories of happiness or suffering. They don't understand what they do to us, Galactors without comprehension. The mirror shifted, showing other scenes. Previous guardians facing the same choice, Elijah now confronted. Some chose containment, others attempted to open the doorway fully. None had completely succeeded at either. The balance must be maintained, Catherine continued. Complete separation would destroy what we've become. Complete merging would consume what remains of humanity in us. What should I do? Elijah asked, the question torn from somewhere deep within. Find the middle path, Catherine replied. The door cannot remain closed or open. It must breathe. The mirror darkened, then showed the basement chamber with its stone pillars and symbols. A specific configuration appeared, different from Margaret's notes on permanent sealing or Abigail's hopes for complete opening. Neither side has the full truth, Catherine explained. The entities seek freedom, but would dissolve in our reality without structure. The Watchers seek containment, but preserve only stagnation. The doorway must remain as it is, neither sealed nor opened but regulated. The front door opened behind him. Roy stepped onto the porch, his expression shifting from concern to recognition when he saw the obsidian mirror. The Watchers called it the Black Window, he said quietly. My grandfather described it in his journals, but we thought it was lost. It shows the truth, Elijah replied. Roy nodded. And what truth does it reveal? That both sides are wrong. The ritual isn't meant to seal or open permanently, it's meant to regulate, to create balance. Understanding dawned on Roy's weathered face. A breathing door. Exactly. Elijah turned toward the house. I need to see Margaret's original notes again, not the versions either side has shown me, but her complete findings. Inside, the conflict had escalated. Martha and Henrietta were dismantling Abigail's equipment while she protested vehemently. The lake's glow now penetrated the house through every window, casting everything in ethereal blue-green light. Stop! Elijah commanded, his voice carrying unexpected authority. The Guardian has seen the truth. All eyes turned to him as he held up the obsidian mirror. Neither of you has the complete answer, he stated. The ritual was never meant to seal or open fully. It's meant to create equilibrium, a controlled exchange. Abigail's expression hardened. That's not possible. The mathematics of the convergence are more complex than you've calculated, Elijah interrupted, surprising himself with certainty. Show me Margaret's complete notes, all of them. No more selective sharing from either side. The house trembled more violently. From the basement came the sound of stone grinding against stone as the containment chamber responded to the growing energies. We don't have time for debate, Elijah continued. The door is already moving on its own. If we don't act together, we lose control entirely. The obsidian mirror pulsed in his hand, showing the lake bottom beginning to fracture as ancient forces pushed upward from below. Time seemed to compress as Elijah led the group down to the basement, the obsidian mirror guiding their way when flashlights and electric lamps failed. The stone chamber had transformed, symbols now glowing with internal light, pillars vibrating with harmonic resonance. The central platform risen several inches from the floor. Margaret's complete notes, Elijah demanded again. Martha hesitated, then removed a hidden panel from the wall, extracting a slim volume bound in faded leather. We kept this separate from her public journal. Simultaneously, Abigail retrieved a folder from her equipment case. And these are the pages she sent to scientific colleagues, the ones the Watchers don't know about. Together, the documents revealed Margaret Holloway's complete understanding. Mathematical formulas, ritual configurations, and critical observations about the doorway's true purpose. She discovered the same thing I just learned, Elijah explained, comparing the materials. The doorway was never meant to be permanently sealed or fully opened. It's designed to breathe, to allow controlled exchange between realms. That's not possible, Henrietta objected. Our entire purpose has been containment. Containment, yes, Elijah agreed, but not complete separation. Look at these original symbols. He indicated patterns on the earliest stone carvings. They don't represent locking but regulating, a valve, not a barrier. Roy studied the symbols. My grandfather might have misinterpreted or been misled, Martha added softly. The knowledge was passed down orally for generations before written records. The chamber floor suddenly rippled like disturbed water. From its center emerged a crystalline formation, transparent but with rainbow refractions dancing through its structure. It grew upward, taking shape before their eyes, forming what appeared to be a key but unlike any conventional design. Organic flowing lines formed its shaft, while the head contained intricate, seemingly impossible geometries. The last component, Abigail whispered, scientific curiosity temporarily overriding her personal agenda. The key described in theoretical terms, but never physically manifested. The crystalline key hovered in the air above the platform, rotating slowly, catching and amplifying the light from the glowing symbols. Within its transparent structure, microscopic scenes played out, the history of the doorway, previous guardians, the entities beyond, all compressed into living crystal. The ritual requires this, Elijah realized, comparing the key's shape to diagrams in Margaret's notes, not to lock or unlock, but to regulate the flow. The ground beneath the house trembled more violently. Through the obsidian mirror, Elijah could see energy surging upward from the lake bottom, threatening to break through uncontrolled. "We need to complete the circle," he announced, studying Margaret's ritual configuration. 5 participants representing different aspects of the connection. "What aspects?" Roy asked. "The seeker," Elijah pointed to Abigail. "And driven by scientific knowledge and personal loss. The keeper," he indicated Martha. "Maintaining tradition and historical continuity. The witness," toward Henrietta. "Documenting and preserving the record." The bridge, to Roy, connected to both sides through family bonds. "And the guardian," he concluded, "who maintains balance rather than choosing sides." Following Margaret's diagrams, they positioned themselves around the central platform. The chamber responded immediately, the stone floor solidifying again, symbols brightening, the air pressure stabilizing. "The final component requires emotional investment," Elijah continued, reading from Margaret's notes. "Each participant must contribute what connects them to the doorway." Understanding dawned on their faces. A sacrifice, but not of blood or life. Of attachment. "We each surrender what binds us emotionally to what lies beyond," Elijah explained. "Not to sever the connection, but to transform it from attachment to guardianship." Abigail clutched her locket containing Sarah's photo. "I can't just let her go. That's why I'm here." "Not letting go," Elijah clarified. "Transforming your relationship with her loss. From desperation to acceptance." He removed the crystal vial from his pocket, Catherine's face still forming and dissolving within. "I'll go first." Placing the vial on the platform beside the crystalline key, Elijah spoke directly to it. "I accept that you're changed, Catherine. Neither lost nor returned, but transformed. I release my need to recover what was, while honoring what remains." The vial's contents glowed brighter, Catherine's face smiling with what might have been approval, before dissolving into pure light that flowed into the crystalline key. One by one, the others stepped forward, Roy with Michael's toy boat, Martha with a fragment of Margaret's research, Henrietta with Emily's hair ribbon, and finally, Abigail with her daughter's locket. Each offering merged with the key, which now pulsed with combined energies, the microscopic scenes within it shifting to show a new configuration, a doorway neither fully opened nor completely closed, but partially transparent, allowing regulated exchange between realms. "The breath between worlds," Roy murmured, recognition dawning. As the final sacrifice merged with the key, it descended slowly toward the central lock in the platform. The house stilled its trembling, the chaotic energies now channeled and directed. "Together," Elijah instructed. Reaching for the key, the 5 participants each placed a hand upon it, guiding it toward the ancient lock that had waited centuries for this moment of perfect understanding. As their hands guided the crystalline key into the ancient lock, a resonant tone filled the chamber, pure and harmonic, vibrating through stone and bone alike. The key settled into position with a final crystalline note that hung in the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone floor began to transform, its solid surface becoming transparent as if turning to glass. Through it, they could see an immense space below, not earth or rock as expected, but a vast chamber filled with swirling energy and structures of impossible architecture. The boundary between worlds had become visible. From below, figures approached, humanoid but altered, moving with fluid grace. Elijah recognized them from the obsidian mirror. Michael, Emily, Margaret, Sarah, and Catherine, leading a procession of others taken across decades. The 5 ritual participants stood transfixed as the floor between realms thinned further. From the convergence point rose a perfect sphere of water, about 2 feet in diameter, hovering in the air before them. Unlike the small visions in the crystal vial, this orb contained complete, living images, a window between worlds large enough to show their inhabitants in detail. Within the orb, Catherine's face formed. Now fully visible and speaking with clear intention, "The bridge opens in both directions," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics but still recognizably hers. For the first time, balance has been achieved. Beside her appeared Michael Caldwell, no longer a child, but not quite a man, something in between, preserved at the moment of transition. "Brother," he said to Roy, whose face contorted with emotion, "you've kept watch all these years." "I never stopped looking for you," Roy managed. "I never left completely," Michael replied. "The boundary was thin enough for us to watch even when we couldn't cross." Sarah Winters moved into view, her scientific curiosity evident despite her transformation. "Mom," she said to Abigail, "you came seeking answers." "I came seeking you," Abigail replied, tears streaming down her face. "And found something larger," Sarah responded. "The knowledge you always pursued." Other figures appeared briefly, Emily speaking to Henrietta, who had known her as a child. Margaret acknowledging Martha, who had continued her work. A procession of the transformed, each recognized by the living. Catherine returned to the foreground, addressing Elijah directly. "You understood what others missed. The doorway was never meant to be sealed or thrown wide, but regulated, allowing exchange without merging." "What are you now?" Elijah asked, the question that had haunted him since first seeing her in the vial. "We exist in a state between matter and energy," she explained. "What you perceive as water is the closest approximation your senses can process. We retain our human consciousness, but experience reality differently, beyond linear time, beyond physical limitation. Are you happy?" The question sounded inadequate even as he asked it. Catherine's expression conveyed complex emotion beyond simple human categories. "We are more than we were, though we remember being human with both joy and sorrow. We've gained understanding beyond earthly constraints, but lost certain connections that gave life meaning. Will you ever come back?" Abigail interrupted, the question clearly intended for Sarah. "Not as we were," Sarah replied gently. "The transformation cannot be reversed. But with the doorway properly regulated, communication becomes possible. Exchange of knowledge, limited visitation during convergence points. The barrier will thin periodically," Catherine continued, "allowing controlled interaction without the dangers of complete merging or total separation." The orb shifted, showing the underwater realm more completely, vast crystalline structures containing what appeared to be repositories of knowledge. Laboratories of light and energy, and communities of the transformed living in harmony with the original entities. What they sought from humans was understanding, Margaret Holloway explained, joining the assembly. They collect consciousness because they lack emotional experience, empathy, grief, love, loss. Concepts alien to their nature, but fascinating to their collective. They preserve what they cannot comprehend, Sarah added. But preservation altered us as contact with us altered them. We've become something new together, neither fully human nor fully other. The orb pulsed, its light intensifying. "The convergence peaks," Catherine warned. The key must be turned now to establish the regulatory pattern. Neither locked nor unlocked, balanced. How? Elijah asked. Together, Catherine instructed. All 5 aspects in harmony. Elijah looked at the others, representatives of different approaches to the mystery, now united in common purpose. They placed their hands on the key once more. 3 turns clockwise, Catherine directed. Then 2 counterclockwise. The rhythm of breathing, in and out, receiving and releasing. As they began turning the key, the orb's surface rippled. Within it, Catherine's hand seemed to reach toward Elijah, almost touching the boundary between worlds. We remain connected, she said, though transformed, neither together nor apart, but in balance. The key turned with surprising ease, each movement producing harmonic tones that resonated through the chamber. With the final turn, the transparent floor solidified again, but not completely, its surface now resembling water made permanent, allowing visibility between realms without direct access. The orb remained, floating above the locked key, a permanent window between worlds. The Guardian's duty now, Catherine explained, is not to prevent access but to ensure balance. The breath between worlds must be maintained. I understand, Elijah replied, feeling the truth of his role settle into place, not ending his grief, but transforming it into purpose. As dawn approached, the ritual's energy gradually stabilized. The violent tremors subsided, replaced by a gentle rhythmic pulsing, like breathing, that synchronized with the lake's subtle movements outside. The house itself seemed to settle, creaking and shifting until it found harmony with the new pattern established below. From the crystalline key, now permanently positioned in the central lock, a small formation grew upward, branching, flowing, and finally separating to form a perfect ring of intertwined, silver-like metal and crystal. The Guardian's mark, Martha whispered, recognition in her eyes. Thomas Caldwell wore one. It vanished when he passed. The ring hovered before Elijah, waiting. When he finally took it, the material felt neither cold like metal nor warm like living tissue. But somewhere in between, a boundary substance reflecting his role as intermediary. It connects the Guardian to the house, Roy explained. To the doorway. The Watcher's records speak of it. Elijah slipped the ring onto his finger. Immediately, his awareness expanded. He could sense the lake's depths, the boundary's integrity, the subtle exchange now occurring between realms. Not thoughts exactly, but impressions, flowing through the connection like water through a regulated valve. I can feel them, he said quietly. All of them. And the others, the original entities. Through the luminous orb still floating above the key, Catherine watched with understanding. The ring attunes you to the boundary. You'll know when adjustments are needed, when the convergence points approach. What now? Abigail asked, her scientific detachment returning now that she'd spoken with Sarah. The cycle is regulated rather than ended. What does that mean practically? The house must remain, Henrietta answered. The Guardian must maintain residence. The doorway requires presence. My research, Abigail began, can continue. Margaret's voice came through the orb. But with understanding and responsibility. Document but do not interfere. Knowledge but not exploitation. Abigail nodded slowly, acceptance tempering her ambition. I'll establish proper protocols, scientific observation within ethical boundaries. The 5 participants ascended from the basement, each changed by the experience. In the living room, they gathered around the table where their collected artifacts remained, physical representations of the journey that had brought them to understanding. The Watchers need to adapt, Martha acknowledged, looking to Roy and Henrietta. Our purpose isn't containment alone, but regulation. A new covenant, Roy agreed. Not guardians against, but guardians of. Outside, the lake had returned to apparent normalcy, its surface no longer glowing, its depths once again concealed. But through his new awareness, Elijah could sense the constant, gentle exchange now occurring beneath, a balanced flow between worlds, neither severed nor fully merged. The original property documents lay on the table beside the artifacts, Martha retrieved them, producing a pen from her purse. The deed needs modification, she explained, to reflect the new arrangement. Working with careful precision, she altered the property's legal designation, adding all 5 names under a new classification: custodians of Lake Stillwater. The house and land belong to all of us now, she explained. Different roles but shared responsibility. I have a cabin in the mountains, Elijah said, but I'll stay here. The Guardian needs to be present, not every minute. Catherine's voice came from the ring on his finger, audible to all, but consistently. The boundary is stable enough to permit absence, with regular return. Abigail looked toward the lake, where her daughter now existed in transformed state. I'll establish a research station nearby, monitoring equipment, proper documentation. I'll provide historical context, Henrietta offered. The library archives should include the complete truth now, not selective parts. And I'll maintain the property, Roy added. Physical upkeep of the house and grounds, what my family has always done, but with better understanding. As they finalized arrangements, the morning sun crested the mountains, sending rays across the lake's surface. Where light touched water, subtle prismatic effects appeared, barely perceptible rainbow patterns forming and dissolving, visible only to those who knew what to look for. Through the ring, Elijah sensed Catherine's presence, not physically returned, but connected. Their relationship transformed rather than ended. Lost converted to new purpose. Will I see you again? He asked softly, touching the ring. During convergences, her voice replied in his mind. When the boundary thins naturally, but you'll sense me through your connection to this place. Neither together nor apart, but in balance. The luminous orb from the basement had followed them upstairs, floating gently in the center of the room. Within it, the transformed watched the living complete their arrangements, 2 worlds observing each other across a regulated boundary. The doorway breathes now, Catherine said through the orb. Her final message before the connection would thin until the next convergence. In and out, receiving and releasing. This is how it was always meant to be. The 5 custodians stood together as the orb gradually diminished. Not disappearing completely, but reducing to a small, permanent window between worlds, a regulated exchange point housed within the structure built to contain it. Elijah looked down at the Guardian's ring on his finger, feeling its connection to the house, the lake, and what lay beneath. The $50 purchase had given him something unexpected, not recovery of what was lost, but transformation of his grief into purpose. Outside, Stillwater Lake reflected the morning sun, its surface peaceful while its depths remained mysterious, both aspects now in perfect, breathing balance. 1 year had passed since the night of convergence. Stillwater Lake had settled into its new rhythm, the regulated exchange between worlds maintaining perfect balance through changing seasons. The house stood transformed, renovations completed with careful respect for its original purpose, while enhancing its function as both home and monitoring station. Elijah sat on the rebuilt dock, watching afternoon sunlight play across the water's surface. The Guardian's ring glinted on his finger, its connection to the lake a constant comforting presence. Through it, he sensed the gentle flow of energy below, neither surging nor receding, but breathing in perfect measure. From his pocket, he withdrew a smooth river rock, ordinary in appearance, but profound in significance. He'd carried it for 7 years, collected from the rapids where Catherine's kayak had vanished. Her body had been recovered miles downstream, but this stone represented the exact point of separation where she had been lost to him. Today marked the anniversary of both losses. Catherine's death 7 years earlier, and her transformation 1 year ago. Different forms of absence, yet both part of his journey to this moment of equilibrium. The luminous orb, now permanently housed in the living room, had shown increased activity that morning, a sign that the boundary was naturally thinning on this significant date. Within it, Catherine had appeared more clearly than usual, guiding him to bring the stone to the lake at precisely this hour. As the Guardian, Elijah had learned to trust such communications. The regulated doorway allowed meaningful exchange without danger, wisdom and connection, flowing between realms while maintaining necessary separation. The other custodians had settled into their roles with similar adaptation. Abigail's research station operated from a cabin nearby, documenting the phenomena with scientific rigor tempered by ethical boundaries. Roy maintained the property with newfound purpose, understanding the physical structure's importance to the metaphysical balance. Martha and Henrietta managed records and community relations, gradually introducing carefully vetted townspeople to the truth about Stillwater. Pine Hollow had changed too. The reflexive fear surrounding the lake had transformed into respectful awareness. Children were still kept from the water's edge, but now with education rather than superstition. The house was no longer avoided, but acknowledged as a place of importance, a regulatory point between worlds that required protection rather than fear. Elijah held the river stone in his palm, feeling its smooth surface warmed by the sun. Catherine had collected such stones on their hiking trips, appreciating the way water shaped rough edges into perfect smoothness over time. Like grief, she'd said once, painful and jagged at first, but eventually worn into something you could carry without being cut by its edges. Following her guidance through the orb, he extended his hand over the water. The lake's surface responded immediately, rising slightly to meet the stone rather than waiting for it to fall. As stone touched water, a small, perfect circle formed around the contact point. The water didn't splash or ripple, but parted deliberately, creating a miniature version of the boundary below, a controlled opening between realms. The stone neither sank nor floated, but remained suspended at the intersection, gradually transforming. Its solid matter became semi-transparent while maintaining its form, a physical object existing in both states simultaneously. Through his connection to the ring, Elijah sensed Catherine more strongly than ever, not returned to human form, but present in a way that transcended physical limitations. Not a ghost or memory, but a consciousness existing in the regulated space between worlds. The final component, her voice came clearly through the connection. A personal anchor point, Elijah understood. While the basement chamber regulated the primary doorway, this small connection, formed from an object significant to them both, created a personal window between their worlds. A private communion point accessible even when the main boundary was at its least permeable. Around the transformed stone, the water glowed softly, not the intense blue-green of convergence, but a gentle, warm light that felt like welcome, like home. Neither fully separated nor completely merged, Catherine's voice explained, but connected in balance. Elijah felt something release within him, not the sharp pain of fresh grief or the hollow ache of long absence, but a gentle transformation of his own. His role as guardian had given purpose to his loss, converting isolation into connection. The $50 house by the lake had offered far more than shelter. It had provided restoration of a different kind, not recovery of what was lost, but discovery of what could still be. As sunset approached, painting the lake in amber and gold, Elijah remained on the dock. The memory stone glowed softly at the boundary between air and water, earth and liquid. Past and present, a perfect symbol of the balance now established in all aspects of Stillwater. The lake breathed its gentle rhythm. The house stood sentinel on shore, and between worlds connection flowed in perfect, regulated measure, receiving and releasing, like the natural rhythm of life itself. Elijah Harper, mountain recluse turned guardian, had found what he hadn't known he was seeking, not an ending to his story with Catherine, but a transformation of it into something new and enduring, balance at last.